Welcome to Season 9, Episode 52 of the Be Conscious podcast. Today, I am pleased to interview Dr. Shafer Steedren, who is a neurologist, a mom, life coach, podcast creator, and host of Talks with Dr. Shafer. Listen in as Dr. Shafer shares her journey from relationship trauma to an aligned life and how she now helps others achieve the same. Here we go.
Welcome to the Be Conscious podcast, the show that brings you enlightened perspectives on the frequency of money, life's many challenges, and those heavy feelings that may be holding you back from living your best life. And now your host, Dr. Susan Nicholas.
Dr. Shafer is the producer of What's Up, Young Authors, a podcast she created with her daughter to highlight and inspire young authors and readers. She is also an author and a publisher with Little House of Dreams Publishing. Dr. Shafer went through personal trauma and isolation to reclaim her story and rebuild a life aligned with her goals and values. Through her creative works, she hopes to help others reclaim their story and create the path to a beautiful future. Dr. Shafer, welcome to the Be Conscious podcast.
Dr. Nicholas, thank you so much for such a lovely introduction. I feel so welcome, and I'm just so excited to have the opportunity to speak with you today.
Oh, likewise. And please call me Susan during the show. I prefer it. It's no problem. But I think you have a persona, or your branding is around Dr. Shafer. Can I ask you a little bit about that? Is Shafer a family name, or is that your first name, or how does that? It sounds like a last name for me, but it's interesting. I love it. How did that come about?
Thank you. Thank you so much. So yeah, that's one of those things that I've been explaining my entire life. It is my first name, and it's actually this wonderful gift that my mother gave me. She is an oral pathologist, and she was trained by Dr. William Shafer, and he is kind of a heavyweight of the dental world and the oral pathology world. He wrote the textbooks, and everyone knows his name. So I have his last name as my first name. And it was really funny because if I ever went to look at slides when I was in medical school at the dental school, and someone would say, oh, the Shafer method of doing something, everyone would look at me so confused.
You say, yes, there is a connection.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
They're confused because here's a Shafer with them. But yeah, it's my first name. But I did find that with patients, it was much easier to say Dr. Shafer. And I'm just like you. I would rather be, just Shafer. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I've been looking at your work and learning a little bit more about you in preparation for this podcast. And I wonder if you could give us a little bit of the backstory. You're a neurologist, you said, but what was your path into doing that? It sounds like you come from an academic or a medical family. And then are you still practicing? Maybe you can give us the pathway and what you're doing now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I do come from actually a dental family. And it's so funny, right? When our parents do a certain thing and you're coming of age and you don't do that thing. So my biggest form of rebellion when I was a young person was I went to medical school and not dental school, like my mother and my stepfather, who both were academic dentists at the dental school at Indiana University, where I later went on to study. So that was my big rebellion. Over time, so I married very young, and I spent a lot of time, as did you, in my pre-medical and then medical training and then internship and residency. And then you come out of that and you start to be an attending physician, and it's so exciting and challenging. And so I got to experience all of that, and it was so amazing, and so much growth happened. What was also happening in the background was my personal life was leading to me having less and less autonomy. And over time, I was no longer able to work in medicine because that personal life was really going over into my professional life. And I reached a point where I had to make a decision because I was living, I was alive, but I wasn't living my life. I didn't feel that I had the ability to really take control over my personhood and my future. And so just like you've talked about with other guests on your wonderful show about, you can come to that point, but you really, to move forward, you have to make a decision and decide how you want to move forward from there, what you want to do to change your circumstances and stop feeling so stuck. So at that point, I did make the really difficult choice to leave my marriage and to try to just reclaim my own story for myself and also for the little people in my life, for my children, so that they could see me the way that I wanted also to see me as an autonomous person who was really striving to do wonderful things in the world. So at that point, I had to go through the challenging times, the messy times. I call it the messy middle, where you're in kind of that ooey gooey stage, right? It's a wound that hasn't healed yet. And you feel like you're not of much service to anyone, which is really challenging for someone like myself as a physician. And you have all this desire to help, but your limiting beliefs and your mindset are such that you're feeling quite hopeless and everything just feels messy. You're just feeling unmoored. And from that point in my life, I was a bit lost and not seeing a clear path forward. What started happening was, even though, I had, for my privacy, I'd changed my telephone number several times, I'd changed my email, I really was isolated even more, not going out into my community. But what was happening was other women were somehow reaching me. They were texting me and calling me and emailing me saying, so and so, maybe someone I didn't even know or a mutual friend or contact, told me that you can help me. I'm going through this really challenging time in my life. And they said, you can help me.
Interesting. Before we go into kind of what you're doing or what ways that you were believed to be able to help other people, can I take us back just a little bit about something you said about your autonomy?
Of course. Yeah.
What do you now that you've come through, or maybe you're still in the tail ends of that messy middle that you spoke of,
Hmm.
but you said a couple things. You said there was a loss of autonomy and that there were some limiting beliefs.
Hmm.
Can we go a little bit deeper into at the just if we could go back in time and go to your prior self, that younger self
Hmm.
that felt a loss of her agency, believed that she couldn't continue practicing or believed that her autonomy was being taken away. What do you now believe was going on inside of you where that
Hmm.
was allowed?
Yeah, I think that's an important point is when you're in the stage where you haven't really become introspective about your circumstances, it's really easy to focus all your energy externally and on fixing the
Mhm.
situation, right? And the growth and the change only comes from when you start to introspectively look at what power you do have over your circumstances
Mhm.
and stop focusing outwardly. And that does not mean it's your fault, what's happening to you. It just means that you can make choices, and that's not blame. That's agency. That's telling someone that they matter and that they have a choice. And the way I like to describe the realization of that when you're feeling that you don't have that agency, you don't have a choice, It's like you're on a hamster wheel and you're running and you're running and you're trying to reach a location, a goal that you can't reach just because of the construct you're in. You're in this hamster wheel. You're not focused on yourself. You're just focused on just trying to meet this unattainable goal. But then once you see your agency and you see that you do have a choice, you see it's not a cage, it's a hamster wheel, and that you can step off.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that is a very powerful visual. As you were speaking, it reminded me of a couple of, I would say, less introspective times in my life, times when I was not conscious, if you will, of myself, or when I didn't take agency of myself, or I felt disempowered. This is what kind of came up for me. There was a time when I was a young girl, and I used to have these pajamas that said, anything boys can do, girls can do better.
Hmm.
And so my aunties and my parents kind of wanted me to be empowered, if you will, as a little girl. And I was the only girl. I had like four brothers. Like I was always kind of like fighting for my, like, to show that I had power, even though I was
Mm-hmm.
a girl. And so I carried that belief with me that I could do anything. And so I would have this, I would say never in the universe. But as I was growing up and I met other women, I would see them being disenfranchised in their relationships or belittled, or I'd see their power taken away. Where a concrete example would be like I would see a woman and her spouse or her partner was cheating on her, but she would stay in this relationship. Or there's other types of verbal or physical abuse, and they would stay in the relationship. And so, as this little empowered belief that I had, I was like, "Oh, I would never do that." I would never be in a relationship. I had never stayed with someone that hit me or someone that cheated on me. No, never, never. As soon as that occurred, I would be out of there because I felt so empowered, and I would be like, I would never stand for such a thing. Well, fast forward, I'm in a relationship with who's now my son's father, and he's cheating on me and lying to me and harming me. Like I was very hurt in this experience. And I remember sharing it with another woman who had the same response as my younger self. I'd never stay with somebody that treated me like that. Da 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 da. I can trust them. I can't be in a relationship where I don't trust the person. And then it caused me to look at myself. And I said, I used to like really hold that belief, and I used to really be strong in it until I was in it.
Yeah.
And then
Mm-hmm.
I recognized like like the way that I described myself, Dr. Shafer, is I felt 2 centimeters tall. I felt so small. I felt so insignificant. I felt so diminished. And
Mm-hmm.
I stayed in that relationship. And so the excuse that I gave myself was, I said, well, I've got a kid and I don't want to be
Mm-hmm.
on the run with a little baby. And then I had like a higher thought. I was like, what is this experience showing me? Like, what am I? This is how I think about relationships, generally speaking, whatever is going on in them. I believe that relationships are fertile ground for soul maturation. I don't believe that we are in them by accident. I do not believe there are coincidences in the universe. And I'm not suggesting that we have a cruel universe where I said I'd never do that, and so it was shown to me. But in a way, I believe it was shown to me so I could have compassion, right? For people that do have this experience, like they're having it for a reason. It's not because they're disempowered. They're powerful divine beings just like you and me and everybody else. But there is a circumstance that they're here to
Mm-hmm.
learn something about themselves. And so I began to ask, when my son was 2 years old, I had my spiritual awakening. I stayed with his father for 3 more years, like after my awakening, when I began asking these higher questions of myself, like, what is this designed to teach me? What am I doing? Why am I in this experience? Like, why am I experiencing
Mm.
this? And I could hear my voice like running through my head about all the things I would never do. And then here I was doing it. I was being that woman that I used to judge
Hmm.
for not being strong enough or being weak or, not having agency or autonomy over herself or
Mm.
being disempowered. I was that disempowered person. And so I got to see what that felt like. And so it took me a lot of guts and courage to reclaim my energy, my autonomy, my agency over self. And now I tell you what, now I see that. I see
Mm.
people that are in XYZ, you fill in the blank type of relationship. And then the question it's not a judgment. It's comes from a place of compassion, of observation, of observance. And I just say to myself, look at what they are tasked with learning. That they're learning something, and it's a hard lesson. It's painful. And I remember it well now. And now I never speak about what I'm never going to do or situations I'm never going to be in, again.
Mm. Exactly. Well, we learn those lessons, and never, I think, becomes less and less a part of our vocabulary as we grow older and wiser.
Exactly.
Um, but, and as physicians, we learn that lesson too, right? Because evidence-based medicine, I mean, the climate's changing all the time. What we know is what we know now.
Exactly.
And that can change in a heartbeat. As soon as you publish a paper, it's outdated, right? So our knowledge is always expanding in medicine, and it's the same in our world of just how we're experiencing life. We're always growing, because if we're not growing, we're dying
Mm-hmm.
essentially. But I want to reflect on something that you said about strength, because I think it's so important from your story about saying how I wasn't strong enough. And I think, we both know this at this point in time. You were so strong. You were simply putting your efforts and your energy in a certain direction, in this kind of fixing, external focus, trying to make something work that couldn't, instead of focusing on, okay, this doesn't work. Where do I want to put my energy? Where do I want to put my strength? Because I can either hold up this thing that doesn't serve me, that I don't want, or I can use that energy and that strength somewhere
Mm-hmm.
else.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also about each of us. Okay, so first, I believe that we are energetic beings in an embodiment. Like, we are embodied souls, spirits, whatever you want to call it, essence, consciousness. And I believe that energy that is us has this infinite universal thread, like people may call it an ancestral thread. And that we
Mm.
bring all of that stuff, even if you can't put your finger on it in this lifetime. You can't say, oh, yeah, this was the incident, this caused that. Or you can't kind of put your finger on when you first felt a certain way, or maybe when you first, I would say, adopted a belief. But it seems like you've always
Mm.
had it, like it's always been with you. And I think that's part of it. Like, we come into this world and we're full of stuff. Maybe, you call it
Mm.
baggage, and it's from your familial, your generational, your ancestral past, the past existence of yourself, like all the past iterations of Dr. Shafer and of Susan and all the other people on the planet, like who we've been in other, I would say,
Yeah.
lifetimes. And all that stuff that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
resolved. I don't believe that, in a way, that if you're on the planet right now, if you're in a body, that you have, then you're done with your soul work. Like, I believe that there's a reason that you came in, and one of the reasons that we never really learn about is that we have this goal, or we have, I don't want to call it a goal, that we have this mission, or we have this purpose of transforming those energies. that we didn't complete in our past existence. So let's just say my past existence, I had issues with my self-worth. And then I'm going to come into this life and have all sorts of these very elaborate experiences that show me that I have infractions, or I have maybe deficits, or I have things to learn about my self-worth or my autonomy or my power or my value. And I think the self-worth is a huge one with women, people that come into the divine feminine.
Yeah.
And so then, and whatever it is, whatever I believe, whatever my beliefs are. And again, I believe a lot of beliefs are covert. We don't know that they're beliefs. We just think that's how we are or how things are, or we've held them for so long. They're so entangled and so deep rooted.
Yeah.
We can't separate them from ourselves. You can't say, well, this is me and this is just a belief system. Just kind of like you said about the hamster wheel. People don't realize they're on it. They don't realize they're in a pattern or cycle, and that they can, what did you say? Just step off of it.
Step off of it. Right. Yeah.
To me, it's like this idea of when you're in a pattern or you're in a cycle, and you begin to recognize it. You're like, wait a second. This isn't the first time I've experienced this. This isn't the first time that I've felt this way. Whatever you start to recognize, like one of the things about beliefs or about energy is that you will recognize it. It won't be something like, oh, I've never felt this way before, or this is a new feeling, or wow, I've never conceived such a thing. No, it's just like it feels very familiar to you. You might say like, oh, here it is again, or why do I always feel this way, or I always do this, or what's the response to this feeling that I'm having inside of me? And at the core of it is a belief. And we don't even know how to identify that belief. In our mind, it's just how we are or how we've always been. We've held the belief so long. It has been so intricately intertwined in our being that we don't know what it is to be without it.
Right. Right.
And so we can recognize like beliefs that other people have. And then we say, well, why would you believe that? Because that may not be one of our held beliefs, but it's the same thing. If we just, the reflection of us, other people say, well, why do you think that? Or why do you believe that?
Right. Yeah. No, I love that.
My father always says, I can't swim. And I was like, no, Dad, you're a human being. You can swim. You're just afraid. You're afraid. But for 75 years, he'll tell you that he can't. And so it's kind of like one of those words you said earlier, never say never and never say can't.
Yeah.
Because once he says he can, then so it is.
Right. Right. Exactly. The body in motion stays in motion, and the word can't is almost like a door stopper, right? It's like, oh, there you go, and whereas I can, or I don't know how to, but, kind of changing the trajectory of the but, right? I'd like to swim, but I don't know how. And that's a past and a limiting belief focused way of saying something. I don't know how to swim, but I can learn, right? So you're saying the same thing to start, but you're ending up in a different place because you're using a can and you're not using the can't. You're not using the stopper. You're actually creating forward momentum that invites you to lean into the future possibilities for what you can do, even if it's something you've never done before.
Exactly. I think once we recognize the power of our thoughts, the power of our language, power of our actions, the power of our feelings and beliefs. We know that beliefs are very powerful, but we don't think that our beliefs are very powerful, but they are. And all of those things go toward creating our own life. I like to use a quote by Henry Ford, who said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Seek and ye shall find. Yeah.
You are correct, whatever you say. And so just think about that. It's like, whatever you say, and so it is. That is the power of our language. And I believe that it has so much power because, you and I, we produce audio. We have podcasts, right? or musicians, anyone that looks at sound, it's a wave, it's a frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm speaking at a frequency, you are speaking at a frequency. And that frequency is resonated out to I call it the substrate of creation of the universe.
Mm.
And so once we recognize how powerful we are, we begin to monitor our words. We
Yes,
begin
and
to
our
monitor our
presence, yeah.
thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because we realize how powerful they are. It's not just,
right.
people say, I just thought it, I didn't do it. There's a difference between me thinking about something and me actually doing something.
Mm.
I would say that thought is more powerful than you will ever know.
Hmm. Right, because it's not even just about our words. I mean, so much of human communication, the vast majority, is nonverbal communication. And I wish I could remember her name. I saw a wonderful TED Talk by a woman who was showing the difference between how she presented herself based on essentially limiting beliefs about who she was and what she could do when she walks into a room. And so she kind of came in with a feeling of unworthiness, and her shoulders were stooped down, and she's looking down, and she's almost asking permission to take up space, permission to speak, and leading with this belief that she didn't really deserve to be there, but could you just give me a moment of your time, and maybe I'll kind
Mm-hmm,
of be worth your
mm-hmm.
time, right? And then she asked the audience, "Do you want to hear anything I have to say?" And the answer was no, because she was leading with this presence that she was setting the belief and the tone. Whereas when she showed up and she had realized the power of her words and of just her physical presence, and not just the power for herself, but for those around her that she could influence by believing in herself, by being present, by taking up space, the amazing, encouraging, positive impact that can have on the people around you. And she stepped into the space that way. People light up, and they're gravitating towards that positive energy, towards that potential that she's bringing into the room. And as you said, your physical field, it's not just your body, it's going around you. And you have so much power to positively impact the world by how you're showing up.
Exactly. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your journey from becoming someone who lost autonomy and believed that she had to stop practicing her craft. Can you share with us what was the thought, or what was the belief that you could no longer work?
Hmm. Well, when you're in a circumstance where you are told that that's not acceptable, and you're shamed and told that your energy really should be focused on your family, should be focused on helping someone else with their career and their efforts, because those are actually more important than what you do. And mind you, I was a neurologist. What I did was really, really important. I had a 18 to 22 month wait list to see me in my clinic. So, I mean, I cognitively knew how important the work I did was. But when the people that you want to be the safe people in your life, the people who are the primary people in your life that you look to for acknowledgement, and you really erroneously are looking for basically permission and how you make your choices and live your life, when you're receiving a certain message from them, it can be hard if you've gotten to a state of feeling that your decisions don't matter, or that your thoughts are wrong. It's really hard to just kind of shake that off and say, you know what, that doesn't make any sense. And so it really often takes an external support, and the smallest thing, to shake you out of that mindset. And that's why I'm so passionate about the work I do. And I love the work that you do, and so many other people who are creating content, and they are writing books and making podcasts, where they are highlighting this need to look inward and see yourself as a whole person, and recognize that if you're not in a place where you can grow, as I like to share with people, you need to go. If you can't grow there, you have to go and then grow. And for me, the catalyst was my best friend told me something. I had really come to, it just felt like I had, as you said, been diminished, smaller and smaller and smaller, to a point where I was just unrecognizable.
Mm.
And I didn't know as a person how to move forward from where I was. It really just wasn't sustainable. And I had not shared my feelings very forthrightly with anyone. I'd kind of hinted at it, but I was afraid and I didn't feel I was worthy of sharing my story. And so I hadn't really been very direct. And I was sharing again in a pretty indirect way with my best friend of decades how I was feeling, how I felt around the people that were around me. And he said to me, "Do you know that you matter, that you matter too?"
Mm.
And that shook me to my core, which is, it's such a simple question and statement, right? It's so simple. But that moment changed everything for me because it was almost like I was on a cliff and I had just one little pinky finger holding on to the edge of the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was about to just be lost. And someone said, "You matter." And that small acknowledgement was enough to help change the direction of my mindset and start to do inner work, start to listen to podcasts, start to do reading, start to, as time went on, very carefully share my story in spaces that I hoped were safe to try to move towards a life where I did have a feeling of autonomy, of agency, as you said, and where I was really living in alignment with what I wanted out of, this potentially one life we get.
Mm. Did you ever go back to practicing neurology?
That is really, really complicated because I live in a very rural place. And because of the limitations that had been placed on me before, I had been out of practice for over 2 years. And I did finally get an offer. I did say, you know what, no, I'm going after this. And I got an offer for a job. And then I did have to, after they accepted me, even though it had been two years since I had practiced, after I received a lot of pressure, I had to say, I'm so sorry. I want this job so badly, but I have to decline because, again, I was not in the mental state yet where I could really go up against this external pressure and stand up for myself. And, I wish that I had pushed forward and just done it and just said, no, this information I'm receiving is wrong and I'm going to believe in myself and do this. But that's not where I was at the time. And as we know, as doctors, credentialing is essentially impossible without retraining after a certain period of time. And I do have little ones from my prior marriage. And when you leave the area that you live in, you can jeopardize custody. You need to live within 75 miles. And so for me, something that really made me realize I need to pivot is that was not an option for me, right? I was not, but when I look back, I take a step back and look at my life, what matters to me more than anything? My children. And I can't leave them alone in this situation. I can't lose time with them. So for me, that's the decision I made without regrets. I mean, do I have sadness about that not being a part of my life right now? I do. Do I hope at some point in time that will change? I do. But I'm also feeling so blessed that, as I was saying earlier, this connection was starting to happen organically of people reaching out to me. And as I'm in this messy middle and feeling hopeless, and just stuck and looking at the past and looking at the present and not seeing a way forward, these people reaching out to me and giving me a feeling of purpose led to me looking into, okay, this is happening naturally. How can I make this a thing? How can I make this something that I do? Because I'm doing it. I'm helping these people. I love this. What is this even called? Right. And I came upon life coaching, and a friend of mine that I'd been working with for a long time, she said, "Yeah, I mean that's what you are. You're my life coach, and I'm your first client, and I'm your ride or die. I'll be there forever." So that was so empowering for me to find this field that was very much in alignment with not only where I was in the moment, but where I had been my entire life, as to how I like to connect with and empower people and listen to people. And so then I did enter into an educational program, the Jay Shetty Certified Program for Life Coaching, and completed that. And that was such an amazing experience. I learned so much. I met the most wonderful people, and I learned not only about their stories and how to help them, but also so much about myself, and it moved me forward on my personal healing journey.
Well, before we go into the work that you do, I wanted to share something with you about what you said when your close friend said, "Do you know that you matter?" One of the things that I do to support this podcast and my other conscious work is I do healthcare industry consulting. And it was actually not too long ago. It was back in March of this year. I was doing a project in South Carolina, and I was, it's in a more rural part of South Carolina, like maybe an hour or so south of Myrtle Beach. And this doctor told me that he's a cardiologist. He had a patient that was brought in by what he called his master. And this is in the 21st century. This is in the 2020 time frame, like, and it's recent.
Yeah.
And I had to,
Yeah.
like do a I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what? I said, what? I couldn't even comprehend it. I was like, what do you mean? He said he was brought in. He had collapsed, and he had a heart condition, and he was brought in by his master. And I'm literally still like at a loss, like my jaw, my mouth is open. I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, well, this man was isolated on this farm, or on this, land, and he worked with these people's horses, and he lived there. He was separated from his immediate family, and he did not know that he was free.
Yeah.
And so when he got ill, he was brought in. He said he was like a 50-something-year-old man, but he was brought in by someone that wasn't his spouse or family, but his master, someone that he worked for free. And so he said he asked this man that brought him in, to leave the room so he could he was a grown-up person. He's like, I'm going to see this patient as an autonomous man.
Yeah.
And he said to him, he said, do you know that you are free? And he said the person was like dumbfounded. Like, what do you, just like I was asking, what do you mean?
Right.
He said, do you know that you are free? And he said, for the first time in that person's life, he took agency and autonomy of himself, and he left that servitude.
Wow.
And you say something like, just simple words like, do you know that you matter? Do you know that you are free? Do you know that you are powerful? That you are beautiful? That you are loved? Those are transformative words. They carry a vibration and a frequency that resonate on the soul, at the level of the soul, and have the power to transform.
Exactly.
Words are very important. And I used to, as a child, when I was hurt by words, to try to soothe myself, I would say things like, words can't hurt me. Or sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. because I knew that those words cut to my core, and it was my way of explaining it away. And now I'm very careful about the words I say to myself, the words I say to others, the words that I speak on this podcast, because I know they have the power to transform. They have the power to reach the soul of a person. And so we have to be very careful and mindful of the words that we use, because they are powerful, because we are powerful as beings of light, of beings of energy. So I'm not at all surprised that it was words like, "Do you know that you matter?" that woke you up,
Exactly.
because these are the most powerful words on the planet. It's really speaking to your power. It's like a validation. You talked about this external journey earlier on, about this external journey. I call it the external journey of validation, where you're constantly looking outside of yourselves to prove that you're valuable, that you have worth, that you exist. And then there's a catalyst, or there's something, a dark night of the soul, an awakening, or something that happens where you realize how powerful you are as a being, and that you matter. And that changes everything.
Absolutely.
You begin to see your value and your power.
Absolutely. And I think something that is important when you are in that moment with someone and you say something and you feel the weight of the moment, right? You see potentially the look on their face or the change in their body language. Lean in to that human connection. I think we have so many missed opportunities to help one another in very meaningful ways when we set off what I call kind of an emotional trigger detector, right? You feel this zap of energy, like you've hit a nerve when you say something to someone, and or you feel that feeling in your gut when you're with someone that something's off and it feels uncomfortable, and you change the subject or you walk away, right? You move on because it didn't feel good and you're falling back into your feeling of fear and avoidance. But those are the moments where we need to actually heed that trigger, right? Like when you use a trigger, when you use a metal detector on the sand, you don't hear beep, beep, beep and then run away.
Mm-hmm.
You hear beep, 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 and you're like, okay, that's where I need to dig. There's something really important here. So when we are with people and we feel we're becoming triggered, if we lean into that and we focus not on the emotional part of the trigger and the past, the historical part, but we focus with curiosity about, what is this feeling, right? Why is this happening? What am I sensing here? We have an opportunity to connect with this person, and we very well may save their life or change their future in an incredible way.
Well, before we go into this slight break, I love the idea of digging in. I love that analogy. You don't run away from the beeping of the metal detector. You dig in, you go deep into the sand. And so we need to go deep into our soul when we hear those ping, ping, pings.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you what you are doing now. Like, how do you help people specifically in your life coaching business? Like, what kind of tools do you use? Like, what is your approach to give people, I would say, the permission and give people the perspective that digging into that thing that hurts you the most, or that thing that you've been avoiding for your entire life, is the key to unlocking, I guess, your soul, the key to unlocking your potential and your worth. I'm going to take a short break, and then we're going to talk about that. Okay, Dr. Shafer? Stay with me.
Like what you're hearing so far, make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. How would you describe your relationship with money? Did you ever imagine that your deepest feelings and beliefs about money could be preventing you from acquiring all the wealth that you desire? Click the link below in the show notes to learn more about Dr. Nicholas's highly sought-after Frequency of Money program to positively transform your relationship with money. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
On the Be Conscious podcast, we often talk about mindfulness. Now, before we go into this next segment with Dr. Shafer, I wanted to share something that helps me become more mindful in my conscious work. After my awakening, I made a conscious decision to stop drinking coffee, Coke, and other highly caffeinated beverages because I really hated the feeling of the come down, of really bottoming out and having to re-up or crave coffee and more caffeine throughout the day. I didn't like that feeling in my body. Well, it turns out I'm not the only one. And the creators of Magic Mind, which is a 2-ounce clean energy shot, has really changed the way I think about mental enhancement. What I love about Magic Mind is that it's organic and it's highly researched and the ingredients are very clean. It actually tastes great. It has a little bit of a kick in it, and it gives you that mental clarity throughout the day without having to consume highly caffeinated beverages. Now, if you still like coffee, great, you can have it. This is just an enhancement. For people like me, though, that really enjoy green tea, drink a lot of clean water, and like to drink unsweetened beverages, I really feel like it gives me that mental stamina, that clarity throughout the day, because it was usually like at 2 in the afternoon, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I'd feel the slump. I'd feel tired. I'd want to take a nap. I wouldn't feel very productive. But after using Magic Mind, I feel like I get over that 2 p.m. hump and I feel clear all day. I love it. I would not speak about it on the Be Conscious podcast if I didn't think that it might also be helpful to you. To learn more about it, look in our show notes. And let's continue our conversation with Dr. Shafer. Before that short break, Dr. Shafer, we talked about going deeper. When you hear those pings, when you feel triggered, the idea is not to run away from it, but to dig deeper and to find really the pearl of that treasure that is the key to unlocking whatever's been blocking you or holding you back. Can you share with us your approach in your coaching practice and how you help people to do that?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people don't necessarily understand what life coaching is. And we really focus on things like tools and advice, which is really more mentoring than coaching. But while there are some wonderful tools that I love to use with clients, the most important thing is simply to listen to them and to listen to them in a way that I don't have an agenda. Because for most of us in our life, and oftentimes for good reason, everyone that we are coming into contact with, from our home life to our work life, even to our friends, there's an agenda there in the conversation, in the goals. There are expectations. There are all sorts of things that keep us from expressing our true self and just leaning into really into who we are as people and focusing on our future and our growth, because we're so distracted by all of these other things and by people pleasing and by just not really showing up as ourselves. So the coaching space is fundamentally about creating a space where someone can really be heard with no agenda, but their own agenda. And that really requires peeling back layers of the onion till they really get to their agenda. Because most people who come to you, they have a goal. And that goal might be, I want to lose weight. But there's a lot behind that. And you're helping them to figure out what's the why behind that. And you're often getting down to a limiting belief, right? About their worth and value, for example, at a certain weight. And then, well, what's behind that limiting belief? And often that reason that they're coming to you, that limiting belief, it's not just affecting them in that realm of their life, it's affecting how they're showing up, behaving, and making decisions throughout their lives. And if it's affecting them negatively in one realm of their life, it is most likely doing the same in others. So when you help them get down to the root cause of the feelings they have that they feel are limiting their life, and you teach them how to basically take that backpack off, put it down, and then focus energy forward, and you help them form steps along the way, actionable small goals that are leading you towards your overall goal, towards your vision for the future. And you're helping them learn how to be accountable no longer to external things, but to themselves, how to show up for themselves every day, the amount of growth personally that occurs, and then how that then just opens up just an incredible world of possibility for them in their career and how they show up for their family. It's just incredible. And I am so blessed to be a part of that journey with clients.
Hmm. You struck me when you said listen with no agenda, because I feel like that is something just saying like in regular conversation that I would say humanity struggles with. And I'll tell you what I mean by that.
Mm.
When people are having a conversation, I feel like this is really what's going on. Let's say you say something and I think to myself, I, I want to say something about that, or I want to add to that. Like, this is what I'm thinking in my mind. Like, oh, there's something that there's an experience I want to share about that. And then as soon as I do that, as soon as I start thinking about what I want to say or my agenda, then I'm taken away from what you're saying. I don't listen as well because I'm always trying to butt in with my thought. I want to say it because I think it's important, and maybe it is important.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we do this in medicine,
Yeah.
where I remember when I was in medical school, learning about a study about taking the history. And the idea is, when we're taking a medical history, we have all these questions that we have for the patients. Any prior cancers, hospitalizations, surgeries, what medications do you take? Da, 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 all these questions. And so because we have an agenda and we're trying to get through and we only got a few minutes with this patient, we don't actually let them speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this study, it was found that if we just let people talk, what brings you here today, Mr. or Mrs. whomever, and just let them speak, that they actually answer all of your questions within 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's great. Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I feel like we're always up against. It's like, it's the intrusiveness of our thoughts and that we have an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
It's just simply like the word you said, listen without an agenda. And I had the thought, wow, how can we do that? Because we always have an agenda. Every time that I hear someone say something, it's like this automatic thing where I don't have control. I feel like it just comes to me, these thoughts of something that I want to say in reference to what you just said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I find that, like, in regular conversation, it's not about coaching anybody or providing a service, but just, I feel like we're not good listeners.
Yeah. It's
And
a
how can
different
we
space.
be better listeners?
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a different space. Yeah. It's different.
Can I share like a tool, like a little exercise that I do to overcome myself when I've got my agenda and someone says something?
Please.
Because I think it's not, I don't want to make it right or wrong to have an agenda. Like, even as a life coach, it's like, well, gee, I want to help somebody. That's your agenda.
Yeah.
Even if you don't express it, like, you want to be of service in some way and you believe you can.
Right.
And so that's your agenda. Or maybe you need to earn a living.
Yeah.
All of those things are playing in the background, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not making it right or wrong. So when I have clients, or when I'm actively listening, like even when I'm interviewing people on my podcast, this is part of my work of my conscious work, because I keep a little piece of paper with a pencil, and when someone says a word or a concept or a phrase, or that I would like to speak on, I just jot it down, like one or two words that reminds me, like allows me to continue listening, but reminds me to go back to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a small, because I feel like our mind is a part of us. We're not going to be able to get rid of it. It has
Mm-hmm.
function, and I believe that we have to honor the mind for what it does do for us. It allows us to interact on this earth. To me, I see the mind is designed for the body.
Mm.
It allows us to have this embodied life and to live it in a way that is sustainable, that we can remember things, that we can remember what hurt us and not do that again. We can remember what felt great and we can do more of that. We can meet people on a certain time frame, like we have concept of time and space. The mind has
Mm.
function. That's beautiful. But sometimes the mind is, I believe it likes being comfortable. Even if what's comfortable for the mind doesn't feel good, it
Mm.
likes predictability and routine.
Mm-hmm. It seeks it out. Yeah.
Exactly. And so sometimes those things that are comfortable or routine aren't serving us anymore. And that's when we have to break free of the hold of the mind. Like you said, it's not a
Mm.
cage. Often it's that spinning hamster wheel, or it's a pattern or cycle that just keeps playing. I think about it of those LP records
Mm.
that are playing on a gramophone, and then there's a skip in the record. And it just goes skip, skips, and you keep hearing the
Mm.
same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And on the gramophone, we can easily lift the needle. We can just say, lift the needle and stop that skipping.
Mm.
But in the mind, it's not as easy as lifting the needle.
Right.
It's not as easy as listening with no agenda. I mean, even if that's our intention, our mind will insert thoughts and we'll want to pounce on something like,
Mm.
or, and we notice it a lot when people that haven't, I would say, exercise that listening muscle interrupt you.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't let you finish because that impulse is so great that they just have to get their 2 cents in.
Mm-hmm.
That is, to me, that is that mind that's got the agenda, and but there hasn't been a lot of work
Mm.
to exercise, and to refine that muscle, or find other tools
Yeah.
to say, you know what, I'm not going to interrupt them. I'm just going to let them speak and I'm going to come back around to it.
Yeah.
And a way to do that.
Well, I think, it's like we're kind of used to playing games where we're passing the ball back and forth, right? But then when I have the ball, it's my ball. And when you have the ball, it's your ball. But we're not really sharing the ball, right? We're having these separate experiences with the ball when we converse in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Versus when we commit to, okay, I'm going to practice my listening because it's a habit. And the habit of responding is a habit that 99.9% of us have practiced really long and hard. And if we want to not do that, we have to really consciously put effort in to listen. And when you do that, you are taking yourself out of, as you said, the mind, out of a lot of historical data, right? That has nothing to do with the conversation you're having. You may think it does. You may think because of the experiences you've had in your life, they have informed you in such a way that you should impart this and come to the conversation with this historical data to almost please the person you're with, right? To show them, I connect with you because look what I can share with you.
I think it's also a form of validation, right? If you say
Yeah,
something and
yeah.
then I say something that supports it, then it's like validating for you.
Mm. We think it is. We
Mm-hmm.
think it is. But then when you think back to when did you feel the most validated? Was it when someone heard your story and then they shared their story? Or was it when someone listened to your story and then asked another question and another question and another question to validate your experience and show interest in your experience further? What is more connecting and healing? And if we approach it that way and we say, okay, if this is a friend of mine, I'm going to commit to this conversation. I'm going to host this conversation, but I'm going to put all my attention on hearing this person's story and truly validating and connecting with them. And I believe that you will feel the energetic difference of what it feels like when you leave your mind and you come into your body and you focus on, the body work we do, or focus on our breathing, what's around you. You can feel the light on your skin. You can feel the breeze on your skin. Look at the person in front of you. When you come into this moment and you are fully focused on what they are sharing with you and on how they are presenting to you and connecting with them, if you practice that, and I hope everyone who's listening just gives this a try.
Mm-hmm.
If you practice that and then just take stock, review for yourself how that feels to you compared to when we're tossing the energetic ball of a conversation, I think that you'll find that it's a completely different experience, and that's where the true connection lies.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. I think there's a part of us that wants to share experiences. So you say, "Oh yeah, when I was 5, I broke my arm." You say, "Oh yeah, me too. I broke my leg when I was 7." Like and so the person that says what they're really saying is like, "Hey, I broke my arm." Like, do you know what that is like, right? And then and if I say, "Well, yes, I know
Exactly.
when I had a cast on for 3 months and this," and then to me that isn't also a shared experience. And I think about it when I've interviewed a number of coaches. Like, I've never experienced what people would call an addiction or a drug addiction type of thing. But people that do and that come through that messy middle you talked about, and then come through to help others, they feel that it's essential that they had that experience, and they connect with the person that's coming through by saying, "Hey, I was drug addicted and I came through, like you can come through." Where I think in many ways it would be less effective if someone says, "I'm drug addicted," and I say, "I've never had that experience, but I hear you." It's like, I can't, on a level, I'm not going to be able to fully relate to it because I don't have that shared experience. And so I think there's a place for
Right.
both. But Dr. Shafer, I love that concept of listening with no agenda. I think that is something as worthy. And I agree with you. It feels like just how you spoke it, the energy of what feels like a deeper connection is when I listen to you. And then I ask you a deeper question about your experience and a deeper question about that question and a deeper to go. So in that way, you feel heard. I think that's beautiful.
I think when you flesh it out a bit, right? So when we try to connect, I love the example you gave. It's perfect of, let's say Jimmy broke his arm when he's 5 and he tells you, I broke my arm. And you say, "Oh my gosh, I broke my leg when I was 7." Because with the agenda, you're wanting to connect, you're wanting to meet them where they are. But the question is, do you know where they are? So maybe Jimmy wanted to actually tell you that he missed school and his best friend moved on to a different friendship because he lost a week of school in the hospital. And when he came back, he never really felt like he could connect with his peers ever again. And that changed how he was relating as a child to his peers. Maybe that was the story he wanted to tell you.
Right. But in telling my story, saying, "Hey, I broke my leg. I know how inconvenient or painful it is." You take away from, you can potentially take away.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
redirect.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I get that. I think
Yeah.
that's great. That's a great tip and something to think about. Well, we've come to nearly an hour on the podcast, and Dr. Shafer, I wanted to give you an opportunity to share with the audience how to best reach you and how they connect with you if they want to work with you.
Oh, thank you so much for that opportunity. I am available. The easiest way to find me is at www.drshaferstedronova.com. And why the difference between Stedrone and Stedronova? So when I remarried, I was supposed to get married in Europe where they would have the ova at the end of your name. And so all of my things were branded as such. And but then on a whim, because again, I'm taking agency of my life, we decided to get married in New York City. And they don't do that there. They don't honor those differences, those cultural differences when you're making a marriage certificate. So it's kind of interesting about my branding that sometimes can be a bit confusing, Stedrone versus Stedronova. But yes, it's www.drshaferstedronova.com. You can find me there, and you can find me as Talks with Dr. Shafer on your favorite social media platform. I do different things on different platforms like Instagram and TikTok, and I really just love making short form ways to communicate this message of growth and healing and storytelling with people. I also have a website that is a representation of a community I created, www.wedon'ttellOurStories. And that's a community that I'm building to try to create a safe space for storytelling, to support victims of intimate partner violence and domestic abuse. So I hope that's someplace that you will go and hear other people's stories, and also, listen to music I love to put music there that's at different places of this journey of the messy middle of, maybe the pre-realization stage where you don't really understand what's happening to you, but something feels wrong. And then also the growth stage, because as we've talked about today on the podcast, it can feel really invalidating if you are in a conversation or digesting content that's not where you are. And so I really seek to create content that will meet you wherever you are on your journey of healing and help you recognize the wholeness of who you are, that this is just where you are right now. It's not forever, and you have so much ahead of you.
Dr. Shafer, thank you so much for being with us today. It has been a distinct pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved our conversation, and I hope to chat with you again.
I want to thank you for taking this inner journey with us today. And whether you are coming or going, looking inside or out, remember to be conscious. If you love this episode and if today's message resonated with you, please subscribe, rate, and review the Be Conscious podcast. This helps listeners just like you to find intriguing and transformative content. I also want to know what inspired you and what conscious topics you would like to hear more about. And if you want, you can share those thoughts and questions with me at info@susannicholas.org.
Thanks for listening to the Be Conscious podcast with author, TEDx international speaker, and conscious coach, Dr. Susan Nicholas. Be sure to connect with her to stay up to date with her latest news and works. Learn more about her conscious speaking platform at susannicholas.org/speaking. Stay tuned for the next thought-provoking episode. And whether you are coming or going, looking inside or out, remember to be conscious.